we were making our point, and so they actually just kind of let it go. They figured, they figured what would happen happened. People started getting hungry after about 10 or 12 hours. People started getting hungry, and it started getting cold, and people started drifting away, go back to eat.
And if anything, the message was made. The point was brought across. We're not happy.
Yeah.
And nobody got hurt.
Not really. I think there were maybe a couple of arrests, but at one point there were some old abandoned airplanes, DC-3s or whatever, off the side of the airport. And some guy, the crowd said, well, what are they going to do? And they sent him to town for some bottles of wine and some food, and eventually some of it got out there. But
so you said it was dark out, and
it started getting dark. But before then, while it was still light, some guy stood up when they were discussing about what do you want to do. Now we're sitting down this runway, and by the way, this whole thing made 2 sentences in the Los Angeles Times. I think it was squelched. How often are international airports taken over?
Yeah.
But there was a lot of demonstrations countrywide. So one guy stood, well, you see those abandoned airplanes over there? I think if me and enough people went over there, we could drag one of those things back and leave it here as kind of a little token of our being here, Yeah. And and he started going, and a few hundred people followed him,
Yeah.
And I don't know if there was enough of them to drag one of those airplanes, but it worried the police enough that they got in between us, and they took their buses and got in between us and the airplanes. And drove the people back, because it wasn't the whole crowd, and there was just a few, a couple hundred people at that point.
Okay.
But the last thing I saw was finally I think they finally declared it an unlawful assembly.
Okay.
As people were leaving, when they realized that, well, now we can make it stick,
Yeah.
And so the buses started moving in, and I remember seeing big bottles of Spinata flying through the air, smashing onto the headlights of these buses,
Right.
As little by little, they forced the few dozen or few hundred remaining people back off the airport, when the numbers got to where they could handle it.
Right.
But that series of demonstrations, what really ended it was the people in Santa Barbara got a little tired of it, and there had been demonstrations downtown Santa Barbara, and they said, we need to have an outlet for people to protest, but we need to put a stop to this too, because this is costing us a lot of money in police overtime. So they held a candlelight vigil with monitors, with people who were anti-war,
right?
In favor of being anti-war,
right?
And they had 7,000 or 8,000 people march through down by the harbor, carrying candles,
right,
to make the point that, hey, we're against the war, but we're against the war, but we're not in favor of
our daily
looting
lives,
and burning,
and our daily lives being disrupted.
And that kind of
because that's a very organized way to
it kind of legitimized it, which a certain element in the crowd had kind of made them realize this isn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
So they went home.
Destroying business is not the way to go. Right?
Actually, the business owners at one point. I'm not sure this was the same demonstration, because there were a few over the years, but downtown Santa Barbara, several hundred on State Street, several hundred high schoolers from San Marcos sat down in the middle of the street.
Right.
And at first there was hundreds of policemen there, and lots of shoppers, middle-aged and elderly people shopping.
Right.
And there had been a demonstration out at Raytheon that day, and they'd been blocking the driveway to Raytheon, and they declared an unlawful assembly. And I was there. I left. I moved off to the side because I just had this photo in my mind of Mom bailing me out, and me never hearing the end of it. And I was more afraid of my mother than anything else. So
Raytheon is a missile construction.
They built the Vulcan 20mm cannon.
Oh, cannon.
And
okay, and it's just like it is. I know where the place is at. It's like it's right down the street from UC Santa Barbara.
So okay, it's a big campus. You'd call it a big industrial campus.
And when did this happen?
I'm a little shaky on the dates, but it would have been Actually, I was still living at Francisco Torres.
And you were invited.
So that would have been, yes, I was invited to that one.
This is like 70 then.
So I guess this was earlier than the other ones, but I was invited by a guy who had attended the Air Force Academy and had been, he decided he wanted to be a Navy carrier pilot and had quit the Air Force. His father was an ambassador.
Right.
And he had a lot of links to the government. He said, it was like a Saturday morning, and he said, "Hey, George, you want to go to the demonstration?" I didn't have anything else to do. So I said, "Sure," And so we went out there, and we left. We got off the side once it was declared an unlawful assembly. It was a party kind of thing,
Right.
I went up on my bicycle once again, or maybe I was walking, and there were some executives up there. So I figured, well, maybe they don't know, naively, maybe they don't know they're making cannons here,
Yeah.
And I went up and talked to them, and some of them were just, fuck you, kid, get out of here, But a few of them, you could tell they probably had kids my age. They were talking to me,
So they were.
I'm sitting there chatting with one of the guys, he's very friendly, and then a foreman comes along in a motorcycle and runs into me. Forces me into some bushes.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing anything to him, I was, just standing and chatting,
Yeah.
and, hey, well, maybe I better be leaving, and,
Yeah.
So, when they declared it, they had police in the street out front, and they actually, they talked a couple of people into quitting their jobs that day.
Hmm.
That was what was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And, they had the police parked in the center median, and when they went to declare an unlawful assembly, the people in the crowd went, "I'm sorry, we can't hear you." They're kind of laughing at the cops. So they turned the squad cars around and pointed the speakers right at the crowd and said, "Unlawful assembly." Well, I got off to the side at that point. I wasn't ready to be arrested.
Yeah.
And so then they made a phalanx of policemen,
Right.
and they started moving them in, and they forced them back into a chain link fence.
Right.
And people weren't rioting or throwing rocks or anything. And they had an American flag out there. They were forced back into the chain link fence. Well, when they were pinned against the fence, and
So you're saying the people who were gathered had an American flag with them?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when they were forced back into the fence, they had no place to go. At which point the policemen started ramming people in the ribs with, where were they going to go? They were up against this fence, and so people, at that point the atmosphere got a little ugly, and a few people started cussing at them. Well, then the cops just started wailing on them.
Yeah.
Beat the crap out of a number of people. And we were at a gas station just kind of off the corner there, and standing in a crowd, and they start coming for us, and we're kind of backing up, and they're going to do the same thing to us, and because we're in a gas station, we're in a public place, at that point.
Yeah.
So at that, somewhere along the line, an orange goes flying over our heads and hit into the line of policemen, and one person who I found out later was a DA grabs this girl who had thrown the orange and tosses her on the ground, and about 4 cops run out of they're all about my size now, run out of the line of policemen and just crush her to the ground, and there's knees in her neck and her back and everything, and arrest her,
Ooh.
At that point I left, and but we heard about this demonstration downtown, and we went down there, and at some point, I'm not, there's all these high school kids, a few hundred high school kids sitting down the street, and I'm talking to some people. I actually asked some of the shoppers there, "Hey, stick around here. If there's witnesses, I told them what I'd seen that morning of people getting beat up, basically by the cops." And
wait, so this is you're down on State Street.
Down on State Street, and
you went down the State Street again. Why?
We'd heard on the radio or something there was going to be a demonstration down there.
A demonstration in reaction to that morning? Or?
Just
a different one.
It was, every time there'd be an escalation in the war, there'd be demonstrations.
Okay.
And,
okay. So there's just several different schedules for the day. Okay.
Yeah. At some point, Ronald Reagan flew in. I forget, like I said, they kind of run together after all these years. But at some point, he flew into the Earl Warren Showgrounds there.
Right.
Well, let me